There are moments when even the soul seems to dim, but there is something Jesus whispers in those very instants, a silent breath, almost imperceptible, that touches the exact place where your light trembles. And maybe, just maybe, if you're watching this right now, it isn't by accident. Maybe it's because, deep down, you feel your inner light shaking. But the question is, why? There is a mysterious moment when life slows down, and you realize that something inside you is quietly crying for help. Like a candle fighting against the wind, trying to stay lit even when everything around it insists on extinguishing the little glow that remains. We've all walked through that valley, the weight of exhaustion, the disappointment that breaks us, the hope that shrinks. But there is a detail that few people notice. It's precisely in those moments that Jesus draws near. And what if I told you that there are exactly 3 words, simple, direct, eternal, that Jesus speaks when he sees someone on the verge of giving up? 3 words he repeated in different ways to people who were emotionally collapsing, people who felt they had no strength left, who were ready to let their light fade forever. Words that cross time, reach wounded hearts, and reignite what seemed impossible to revive. Light has always been more than a religious symbol. It is awareness, presence, faith, that small glow that remains even when the night is thick. Jesus always spoke about light. He said no one lights a lamp just to hide it. He said we are the light of the world. And in his most meaningful encounters, it was exactly people's inner light that he restored. The Samaritan woman, igniting dignity where there had been shame. The man by the pool, sparking movement where there had been abandonment. Peter, rekindling courage where there had been failure. Maybe you are in one of those moments now, where the flame trembles. It doesn't go out, but it shakes. And that matters, because a trembling flame is still alive. The fragility you feel may be the prelude to divine intervention, the very ground where Jesus works with the greatest delicacy and depth. He doesn't wait for the light to be extinguished to act. He moves when there is still a thread of brightness, a fragment of hope, an ember hidden beneath the ashes. And today, here, you're going to discover those 3 words. Each one is a map, a path home, a breath, a new beginning. But before revealing the first word, you need to understand something essential, something that may explain far more about your own journey than you imagine. Before revealing the first word, you need to understand why the light inside us sometimes almost goes out. Our inner light is an ancient mystery. Many spiritual traditions describe it as the core of our being, the place where meaning lives, the breath that connects us to what is eternal. For some, it is awareness. For others, purpose. For Jesus, it is identity. When he said that every human being is the light of the world, he wasn't talking about talent or spiritual rank. He was talking about essence. But even the purest light can weaken, not because it stops existing, but because it loses space inside a wounded heart. Across cultures, the metaphor of light represents divine presence. In Jesus' words, it takes on an even more intimate meaning. It's not just the light that comes from God, but the light he plants in us. And throughout life, that light faces winds, storms, deep nights. That's why sometimes, when we look within, it feels as if our glow is unraveling. But a weakening light is not a sign of spiritual failure. It's a sign of being human. Emotional exhaustion is one of the first shadows to approach the inner flame. We live in a world that demands more than the heart can give. Broken promises, heavy responsibilities, the feeling that you're always behind everyone else. The soul gets tired, and when it does, the light trembles. It doesn't go out. It merely shakes. Then comes disappointment, the broken trust, the dream that didn't work out, the love that couldn't withstand the storm, the expectations that dissolved like sand slipping through your fingers. Jesus met many hearts shattered just like that. The Samaritan woman wasn't simply empty of hope. She was fragmented by the stories that had wounded her. And it was in her that Jesus reignited a light she didn't even know she still carried. There's also loneliness, that silent space where no one enters, where you keep what you don't dare to say out loud. Loneliness isn't being alone. It's carrying an inner world that feels too heavy to share. The man by the pool knew that too well. He had waited years for someone who never came. When Jesus found him, his light wasn't gone, but it was nearly invisible. And Jesus saw exactly what no one else saw. Another reason the light weakens is self-punishment. That quiet habit of blaming yourself for everything, believing you don't deserve rest, love, or forgiveness. Peter lived this deeply. He had denied Jesus. He saw himself as unworthy, dimmed, broken. But Jesus found him on the shore, rekindled his worth, and called him back to purpose. Because Jesus always sees beyond guilt. He sees the ember still capable of becoming a blazing fire. And there's the loss of purpose. Suddenly you wake up and realize you're living on autopilot. Nothing inspires, nothing warms, nothing calls you. The light weakens because you forget it exists. You forget why you began, why you persist, why you matter. Modern life is so fast that the soul gets lost trying to keep up, and when it gets lost, it doesn't shut down. It gasps for air. The flame doesn't go out all at once. It trembles, asking for help in silence. This trembling flame is a faithful portrait of our inner life. It doesn't disappear suddenly. It warns us. It tries to endure. It shines with what it has. It waits for the care we rarely give ourselves. And it's in that space, in that territory of fragility, silence, and near surrender, that Jesus moves. He doesn't draw near when the soul is too strong to listen. He approaches when the light is weak enough to be restored with tenderness. He doesn't enter like someone forcing a door. He enters like someone gently touching the ashes, looking for the ember beneath. The truth is that almost giving up isn't just an external act, it's an internal phenomenon. In modern life, we surrender silently long before saying the words out loud. When the emotional weight feels heavier than the road ahead, when it seems like you're always fighting and never arriving, when everything feels too much and yet not enough. But here's a deeper thought that few perceive in the dark. The light you think is dying may simply be asking to be cared for. Maybe it's not the end, but the beginning of transformation. Maybe the weakening light is not a sign of defeat, but a call to return. Jesus always saw value in ashes, always found beauty in what looked beyond repair, always lifted people when they believed there was no way out. And before you receive the first word he whispers when he sees your light trembling, you need to recognize the ground beneath your feet. This inner ground, fragile, human, real. Because it's on this ground, in this vulnerable space, that Jesus speaks the first word. And this word doesn't just illuminate, it awakens. And it's in this very territory of fragility that Jesus speaks the first word. There is a word Jesus whispers when he sees someone's light, trembling like a tired ember facing the wind. Trust. A simple word, but one that carries the quiet weight of eternity. When Jesus speaks it, he's not just offering comfort, he's offering direction. He's extending a bridge between the abyss of doubt and the steady ground of hope. Trust, as if saying, I know what you cannot see. I walk where you fear to step. I hold what you believe is about to fall apart. Trust is not just a request, it's an invitation, a call to rest your heart in the place where light never fails. When Jesus says, trust, it's as if he gently blows on your inner embers, reigniting the glow you believed was gone. Trust doesn't eliminate fear, but it lights the way through it. Trust is the hand that holds your light when you're too tired to hold it yourself. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus expressed this word in many forms. When he calmed the storm and his disciples trembled in fear inside the boat, he asked, "Why are you so afraid?" In other words, trust. When he walked on water and Peter hesitated, sinking beneath the waves, Jesus lifted him and spoke the same essence. Trust. When Jairus' daughter had died and the house was filled with weeping, he said, "Do not fear, only believe, only trust." This word always appears when human light falters, when the heart threatens to give up. But to understand the real force of this word, imagine a story, not a distant, unreachable story, one that could be yours or someone you know. Imagine a woman named Aurora. She always carried a quiet glow, a light that subtly illuminated everything around her. Hardworking, sensitive, full of dreams, but life with its relentless rhythm began pressing in. First came disappointments she didn't know how to handle, Then, a relationship that ended abruptly, leaving a hollow loneliness echoing through her home. And finally, the painful belief that everything she did was never enough. Aurora began waking up every morning with a heavy soul. The flame that once moved her seemed reduced to a thin line of trembling light. She tried to keep glowing, but each step felt harder than the one before. And at the height of her emotional exhaustion, she whispered to herself, "I can't do this anymore." It was in that precise instant, in that painful pause between continuing and collapsing, that something subtle began to happen. Aurora didn't see anyone enter the room. There was no flash of light, no heavenly sound, only a different kind of silence, a living silence, a silence that felt as if it were calling her by name. And in that silence, she almost heard, not with her ears, but with her soul, one single word: trust, trust, not as a command, not as an accusation, but as an embrace. That word echoed inside her like a waking light. Aurora cried. She cried like someone who finally finds safety after wandering lost for too long, and for the first time in months, she felt she wasn't carrying everything alone. Trust. It was as if Jesus were right there beside her, looking at her trembling flame and saying, "I see what still remains. I see what you think you've lost. I know exactly where to place my hand to ignite what you believe is dead." When Jesus says trust, he's not asking you to ignore the pain. He's asking you to let him enter it. Trust means, let me hold the pieces you can no longer carry. It means, give me the part of your story that feels too dark to face alone. It means, I am here, even when you doubt. This word carries deep psychological power. When we trust, the body softens, the breath returns to its natural rhythm, the heart finds steady ground within the chaos. Trust works like a balm that doesn't erase storms but restores the stability needed to face them. It's like placing both hands around a flickering candle. The flame remains fragile, but protected. It stays lit. Aurora understood this slowly. She didn't wake up the next day feeling renewed. There were no cinematic miracles unfolding before her, but somehow that word became her turning point. Trust. Each morning, she whispered it, and Jesus, silently, breathed upon her inner embers with eternal patience. Trust rebuilt her soul not like a sudden beam of light, but like dawn. First, a shy glow, then the horizon brightening, finally, the steady certainty that there was still a path ahead. The light that seemed about to die regained strength, because when Jesus says trust, he is saying, I am renewing you from the inside out. And maybe this is the word Jesus is speaking to you today. Maybe he is looking at your trembling, wounded, exhausted flame and whispering gently, trust. Trust when your eyes see no way out. Trust when your thoughts insist there is no hope left. Trust when the world says it's over. Trust because even when your light trembles, his never does. Trust is the first word because it creates space for everything that follows. It prepares the inner ground. It opens the way. It lets you breathe again. It's like sitting among the ashes and realizing you're not alone. Someone is there, placing a hand on your shoulder and saying, don't end your story before you let me restore it. And as your soul finds shelter in that word, a seed begins to grow. The light you thought was gone starts to gather itself again. Life begins to pulse, but there is something more. Another word, a deeper, more challenging, more transformative one. A word that doesn't just comfort, it confronts. Because Jesus doesn't restore only by soothing, he restores by transforming. Trust opens the heart. The next word reshapes it. And there is another word, the hardest one to accept, because it demands transformation. There is a word Jesus speaks when the soul has already taken a breath after hearing the first call. A word that doesn't arrive as comfort, but as revelation. It doesn't embrace, not at first, but exposes what you've avoided seeing inside yourself. This word isn't comfortable, but it is essential. It marks the beginning of true rebuilding, the kind that requires courage. And the word is rise. Rise is not just physical movement. It's a spiritual summons. It is Jesus looking straight into the human interior and saying, "I have cared for your pain, now I must care for your destiny." He never used this word for those who felt strong. He used it for the fallen, the paralyzed, the ones stuck in cycles that no longer served them. He used it for those who believed they no longer had the right to move forward. Rise is the word of rupture. It shatters excuses, breaks internal walls, dismantles the invisible weight keeping you on the ground. Jesus spoke it to the man lying by the pool who had waited for a miracle for years. That man wasn't only trapped in a body that wouldn't move, he was trapped in a story he had repeated for far too long. Jesus didn't call him to stay. He didn't call him to rest. He said, "Rise." It is the word that ends cycles, the word that demands decision, the word that confronts. And that's where many people feel discomfort. Because while trust feels like an embrace, rising feels like a mirror. Rising requires you to look inside and admit that, at some point, you let fear dictate your story. It requires admitting that you stayed too long in the same place, repeating the same thoughts, living the same patterns. Rise is Jesus asking for movement, even when you think you have no strength left. Psychologically, this word is powerful. It activates a sense of inner responsibility, not as guilt, but as awakening. Rising means saying, "I'm not staying on the ground," and often, the greatest confrontation is not with circumstances, but with ourselves, with the story we tell ourselves, with the image we carry, with the quiet surrender that settled in without us noticing. Rise is like a purifying fire. It burns because it touches what has built up for years. It burns because it reveals, transforms, and destroys what no longer serves. But it is a healing fire. It lights the path you couldn't see before, unlocks internal doors, and returns movement to your entire life. Imagine a small scene. A man named Elias. He had always been a person of faith, but in recent years his light had dimmed. A chain of losses, failures, and fears convinced him he no longer deserved to dream. He let himself become stuck. He woke up, worked, slept, but didn't live. His light was faint, almost gone. Elias no longer believed in new beginnings. One quiet early morning, sitting on his bedroom floor, he whispered to himself, "I don't know how to go on." And in that moment of raw honesty, he felt something that didn't come from outside. It came from within, yet wasn't his. A voice, soft but firm, saying, "Rise." He hesitated. Rising meant leaving old fears behind. Rising meant beginning again. Rising meant letting Jesus touch the parts of his soul he had hidden away for so long. But the word persisted. Rise. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the floor, and stood up. There was no music, no instant relief, but there was movement. And movement reignited his light. Rising doesn't mean being ready. It means refusing to remain where pain has placed you. And that's why this word unsettles us, because it demands action. It demands releasing old excuses. It demands recognizing that Jesus is calling you out of the place that hurts you. And if this word makes you uncomfortable, it's because it's working. It's touching the exact place where your soul has been stuck. Rise is the second word because, after trusting I, you finally have emotional strength to act. And this action isn't a burden, it's liberation. Jesus doesn't say rise to demand perfection. He says it because he knows something greater is waiting the moment you take the first step. But there is still one last word, a word that not only heals, it fully reignites. A word that doesn't just move you, it transforms the dimming ember into full flame. This final word completes the process, restoring the soul's brightness. The third word doesn't just heal, it reignites the light entirely. There is a word Jesus reserves for the moment when the soul has breathed, trusted, risen, and realized that, despite its wounds, it still carries a destiny glowing quietly within. This word isn't meant to comfort or confront. It is meant to resurrect. The word Jesus whispers when the light has almost gone out, but is finally ready to shine again, is live. Live is not merely an impulse to keep existing, it's an invitation to awaken what had fallen asleep. It's Jesus restoring what pain tried to paralyze. Live is light expanding again, taking shape, illuminating the places inside you that have stayed dark for too long. It's as if he lights the beacon once more, the one that guides you back to yourself. This word carries the symbolism of spiritual rebirth. It speaks of movement, rediscovered joy, purpose reignited. When Jesus says live, he is rebuilding the soul from within, reminding it that it wasn't created to survive in a minimal state, but to exist in fullness, even on difficult days. Live is the word that restores meaning to your breath, that reshapes your path, that lights steps you once thought impossible to take. And how does this word act in everyday life? It helps you look at the sunrise with new eyes. It helps you realize that what looked like an ending was merely transition. Live invites you to feel again, to open yourself to hope, to rebuild dreams, to trust that beauty still waits for you ahead. Live is the word Jesus speaks when he sees your light ready to expand, not by your own strength, but because he has restored what was broken. Maybe this is the word Jesus is whispering to you now as you listen. Maybe he is saying, live. Don't just continue, live. Open your eyes to what is still possible. Your light is not dead, it is ready to shine again. There comes a moment, after hearing these 3 words deeply, when something inside finally understands. None of this is magic. It's inner movement. The words of Jesus are not external commands. They are spiritual rescue maps, a path that carries us from the moment the light almost fades to the moment it shines steadily again. And when we bring the 3 words together, trust, rise, live, we discover they form a complete journey, almost like an ascending spiral that lifts us from shadow back into clarity. The first word, trust, is the place where the soul is still fragile, trembling like an ember, barely finding air, yet still carrying life. Trust is the foundation, the invisible embrace that keeps the light from dying. It doesn't fix everything. It opens the space where everything can begin. Trust is the breath, the return to center, the moment you allow Jesus to touch what has been disordered. Without trust, any healing would be shallow. With trust, the soul finds courage to see itself honestly. The second word, rise, is the necessary rupture. After trusting, you must decide. You must rise from the ashes, even if your knees shake, even if your hands tremble. Rising marks the beginning of a new stage. When Jesus speaks this word, he is showing that there is a path ahead, and to reach it you must move. Rise confronts, but it also liberates. It breaks emotional paralysis, dismantles inner patterns, and opens space for something new to grow. It is the stage of restructuring, of conscious rebuilding. And then comes the third word, live, the pinnacle of the cycle. It's not enough to trust and rise. You must live. Live with awareness, with presence, with light. Live not merely as someone who exists, but as someone whose soul has been renewed. Live transforms a restored heart into a full flame. After the trust that heals and the decision that liberates, living is the blossoming. It is the natural expansion of everything Jesus reignited within you. Together, these 3 words form a spiritual arc reflecting the human journey itself, from falling to awakening, from pain to rebirth, from shadow to luminosity. Each word is essential. Each prepares the next. It's as if Jesus is rebuilding you from the inside outward, first the breath, then the step, then the life. And when we see this movement as a whole, we recognize a greater metaphor. No flame becomes fire in a single moment. First it is ember, then spark, then flame, then light that warms and illuminates. The 3 words are exactly this complete process, this spiritual alchemy that reignites what seemed lost. The synthesis is simple yet profound. Trust so the soul can breathe, rise so the soul can move, live so the soul can flourish. This is how Jesus rescues us, not in haste, not by force, but through a perfect spiritual map. And now, with the journey understood, the way is open for the final closing, a closing that doesn't end the experience, but opens a new horizon before your steps. There is something deeply comforting in realizing that the light within you was never truly lost. It may have trembled, it may have dimmed, it may have seemed to disappear, but it didn't die. And it never will while Jesus is near. He always draws close when the soul falters, when the gaze grows heavy, when the heart asks for quiet. He knows the glow you carry, even when you forget. And today, through these 3 words, He simply reminded you of what has always been yours. The light within you did not die. It was waiting for the right words to shine again. And maybe today you felt that, maybe somewhere between trust, movement, and rebirth, something inside you began to pulse again. It doesn't have to be strong or loud, just real. That's how true transformation begins, silently, but with a destined direction. Now, I invite you into a quiet, almost sacred reflection. Which of the 3 words spoke most deeply to your heart today? Trust, rise, live. Each touches a different region of the soul. Each whispers something unique for a different moment of life. Knowing which one resonated most is like discovering where Jesus is walking beside you right now. If one of these words reached you, let it keep echoing within you for the next few hours, the next few days. Deep healing doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds in waves, in layers, in breaths. Jesus works this way, with gentleness and depth. And if this message touched you, I ask something, not just for me, but for everyone walking through the same valley you've walked. Leave a comment sharing which word found you today. It might be exactly what someone else needs to read so they don't give up. Like this video so the platform can bring it to more weary hearts, more trembling lights, more souls ready to be reborn. And if you want to keep walking paths of spirituality, reflection and healing, subscribe to the channel. Here, your light is always welcome. May the peace that surpasses understanding wrap every part of your being. May Jesus continue to breathe softly over your inner embers. May you have the courage to trust, the strength to rise, and the freedom to live fully. Go in peace, and remember, your light is still here, and it was made to shine.